This is section 814. We're going to take a look at the three basic trig ratios. So we're going to examine the three basic trig ratios of a right triangle. Now in geometry, we give names to the sides of a triangle in correspondence to one of the two acute angles. So for example, if I were to say this acute angle here, theta, we would call this the opposite leg. This is the adjacent leg, and then always the hypotenuse is going to be opposite of that 90 degrees. Now, using those labels, we can actually come up with 6 different trig ratios. Now, right now, we're just going to talk about the first 3, later the other 3, but you can come up with 6 ratios to do that, and they all have names. So let's talk about those first 3. If I have this example here, I have my opposite, I have my adjacent, I have my hypotenuse. My ratios are opposite to the hypotenuse, adjacent to the hypotenuse, and opposite to the adjacent. Those names are sine, cosine, and tangent. And we're always going to say of a particular angle that it's going to reference. We need to memorize them. Okay, so my sine is always the ratio opposite to the hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent to the hypotenuse, and then tangent is opposite to the adjacent. We abbreviate them. We call sine, and we abbreviate it like this, sine of theta, or cosine of theta, we write it like this. It's not tan, we say tangent of theta. It's not cos or sin, it's not sin theta, it's sine of theta. That's how we want to articulate it. Now we need to know these ratios. You're going to use these ratios all throughout the trig unit. You're going to use this all throughout the trig unit. It's not something that's going to go away. And so a mnemonic that we use to help is going to be SOHCAHTOA. And so SOHCAHTOA, that's our sine, C is our cosine, T is our tangent ratio. We use it to help with our mnemonic, or with our ratios. So for this first one, it says find sine of theta. So that's my, if I do SOHCAHTOA, so my sine ratio is the ratio opposite to the hypotenuse. So opposite 20 to the hypotenuse 29. And so I'm going to say sine of theta equals 20 over 29. Now sometimes you may have to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the missing side. So in this instance, I don't have the hypotenuse. So SOHCAHTOA, I need to know adjacent over hypotenuse, but I don't have my hypotenuse. And so we need to use the Pythagorean theorem to be able to find what the hypotenuse is. And so if I did, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you're going to get 289 equals c squared. If I square root both sides, you're going to get 17. So this is going to be 17. So now cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so I'm going to say 15 over 17. Now we can also use our calculator to be able to find our ratios. And this is something that we just need to make sure that the unit is correct in our calculator, that's A, and then you just enter the value. So I can type in the sine of 55 on my calculator and I'm going to get 0.82. I can type in the tangent of 45 degrees on my calculator and I'm going to get 1. I can type in the cosine of 60 and I'm going to get 0.5. I can get cosecant, right, which is a reciprocal function that I'm going to talk about later on, just previewing it, but just know these are things that you can enter into your calculator. So what did we learn today? We talked about 3 trigonometric ratios, sine, cosine, and tangent. The sine ratio is opposite to the hypotenuse, and SOHCAHTOA is a mnemonic referring to the 3 ratios that we need to remember. My sine ratio is opposite to the hypotenuse, my cosine ratio is adjacent to the hypotenuse, and my tangent ratio is opposite to the adjacent. This does conclude our lesson. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.